Welcome, everybody, to the Techquanimity Podcast. I am Cynthia Phelps, one of your co-hosts here, and my company, Inner Ally, is interested in using technology to be able to help you have a more compassionate inner voice so that you can thrive in life. And I'm here with my co-host, Mark Montalban.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Montalban, and I'm a co-host here at the Techquanimity Podcast. I'm also the founder and CEO of Mindful Text, and we help people learn mindfulness through text message. And today we're very excited to bring on a new guest, Marcos Polanco. He's a seasoned technology executive with over 20 years of meditation experience. He's helped launch over 50 startups across Silicon Valley and Latin America as director at the Founder Institute. As CTO of Visor Labs, he also led over 30 software engineering engagements, leading to a dozen public-facing apps on Apple App Store. In a prior role, establishing the information technology business development unit for the Government of Puerto Rico, he facilitated the creation of 1,700 technology jobs by attracting $110 million of corporate investment from Microsoft, Lockheed Martin, and Honeywell Aerospace, among others. Earlier in his career, Marcos also co-invented and patented a widely cited machine learning algorithm, then founded an enterprise social search startup to commercialize the technology. Currently, he's the VP of software engineering at Bellwether Coffee in California, with the mission to electrify coffee roasting and empower everyone to sustainably source and roast their own incredible coffee. So we're going to invite Marcos to the stage here. Marcos, thanks for joining
Hello.
us.
Great to be here.
Welcome, Marcos.
Yeah, so you've had a super interesting career, and we'd like to just start off at the beginning. You have a super interesting tie into the AI world these days, and particularly with your the machine learning algorithm work that you've done. Perhaps you can share with us how you got into tech and tied into how you got into this position of, developing this algorithm.
Thank you for the opportunity to chat. It's lovely to be here. How I got into tech? I got into tech because at age 12, when I was at age 12, my father bought a computer, and then I started playing with it, and that's how I taught myself how to program, and that was the beginning. At some point in my career, once I was a professional, and this is in the early days of the internet, and this is what led to the patent, I saw that there was a lot of information on the internet. The signal to noise ratio was absurd. I didn't know that it'd get 100 or 1,000 times bigger later. And when I saw that, I realized, oh, we can just let people vote as a way of filtering, so leverage that the fact that people observed in order to create, identify what was signal and what was noise. And that eventually became the concept of collaborative classification, where we use the way that people group things in order to ascertain what it is. And that was the patent that we developed and commercialized.
How does that relate to, Google wasn't around back then, right? Like, or were they in their infancy? Do you know?
They started in '98. We started in '96. So
Ah,
we were actually exploring similar ideas. Obviously, they did it in an incredibly successful way. We didn't quite get there, but the idea space was very similar in terms of what we were trying to do.
well, you've got some serious technology cred that you've got a patent in that area.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
So with the advancement in kind of the AI tools and how the large language models has busted into the society's popular, everybody knows about it now, and these tools are rapidly advancing. What are your thoughts on how to use these tools? Are you using any of them? I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, we absolutely use them primarily in the area of software development. So often when we're exploring a new area, it's much easier rather than going to figure out a tutorial or whatever. It's just to put out your ideas, and modern AI will actually flesh it out into a working system. So I especially like leveraging that technology to explore areas where I know a little bit, but not a lot, but it uh, offers enough scaffolding, et cetera, to get something working and really explore. That's the primary way in which I'm using it today.
Nice. Yeah. Are you using any particular tools? Like, do you have any favorites?
Mostly I use ChatGPT. I'm using Perplexity as well. Sometimes I use Bard. I sometimes just try the same question in different ones, and they have different policies really as to what kind of answers they offer. So those policies will tend to give you very different results.
What do you think about? I mean, it seems like everybody who's coding is now using these tools as kind of an assistant, right? Like,
Mhm.
do you think the role of a coder is really in flux? Is it changing right now? And what is that going to look like in a couple of years?
Yeah, it's always been changing. At some point, much earlier, you had to do assembly code, and C really came up as the first language that really allowed you to do systems programming without having to learn assembly. So that allowed was a higher level of abstraction. And then over time, all we're doing is allowing developers to express themselves more succinctly and let the computer do a lot more the interpretation of what you meant and therefore what should the code be. And so developers just are going to have a greater opportunity to in a way become closer to their customers, because that's the conversation and what is it that is in the mind of the other, what is it that you really need, is really perhaps one of the least areas that are not subject to computing as much yet. So, but the actual execution of the code will largely be automated. Yeah, this is going to get a lot better than it is today.
How might that change the structure of engineering teams? That thought just came into my mind. I'm curious
Mhm.
about that.
I'm not sure that the structure is going to change all that much. In that you're still going to need folks that are focused on DevOps, on deployment pipelines, on infrastructure, on security, front end, user interface, back end scalability. All those areas of concerns are likely to continue. Simply the scale of productivity of what a single developer can do will be greatly impacted. So you might end up with smaller teams that get a lot more done. That would be my primary thinking.
Very interesting. So you mentioned using different tools such as Bard and ChatGPT. Is there one that you prefer overall, or are you continuing to use Bard? I've noticed that I use Bard less because it provides less of a robust answer. Currently, I'm using GPT-4, and that system I believe is currently the best. I haven't tried Grok or the other one that you mentioned, but I'm curious if you would rank them all. How would you do that, and if maybe you use them for different purposes, or are you primarily just testing out which ones answer in which way?
So in general, my go-to is definitely ChatGPT. It's definitely the best model. It's actually become a little bit slower now that it has a lot of different integrations. So it's trying to search the web and do a lot more than it used to. So it's a little bit less efficient in some ways. I rely more on Bard because of the updated training window. So because it is made by Google and Google is crawling the internet continuously, they have a much more up to date system. So if I know that the question I'm going to be asking is about a little bit more recent events, I'll immediately go to Bard. If it's a more of a timeless question, then ChatGPT does a really great job.
That's a really interesting distinction. So to take the whole conversation in a totally different direction, one of the reasons that we are really interested in interviewing you today is not only do you have the technology chops, but you also have over 20 years of experience as a meditator. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into that?
Yeah, sure. So it was really an accident because when I was in college, there was a requirement to study non-Western cultures. Any non-Western culture, didn't matter. There was also a requirement to study philosophy or religion. Anything was fine. But the Zen Buddhism class would knock out both requirements. So I was like, great, I'm going to take that class. And when I started reading, in particular, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki, I was just blown away. I couldn't believe that this text existed. So in some way, it really connected with thoughts that I had, or just in a way, a perspective that I held that I hadn't seen validated in the world. But when I saw this book, it really felt like my thoughts. And that was really the door that opened. And then a couple of months later, I find myself living just 7 blocks from the San Francisco Zen Center, founded by Shunryu Suzuki. And therefore, I walked into a class on meditation, and that's all she wrote.
I love it. And now, Mark was saying that you practiced Zen for a few years, and then you kind of shifted your personal practice over to Tibetan.
That's right.
Maybe you could just, for our listeners and for me, give us a little background on what is Zen and what is Tibetan, and like what that personal choice was all about for you.
Of course. So this is a very personal articulation of the question, because it's actually quite a sophisticated arena to discuss. The practice that I was in Zen is called Zoto Zen. There's also Rinzai Zen. Rinzai Zen is a little bit more about koans. Soto Zen is about just sitting. And you walk into a meditation hall and you sit on a cushion and you're facing the wall. You're facing a blank wall. And the way that I think about it is that by facing the wall, there's really nothing for your mind to feed on. You're really putting your mind on a starvation diet. And what's going to happen, your mind is always trying to consume the world. What am I supposed to be doing? What time is it? Am I behind on a project? That's why when people sit down to meditate, suddenly all these thoughts come up. And it's simply the mind trying to keep eating more things in the world. And by facing a blank wall, you're really offering it no food. And eventually, the mind will simply fall asleep because it doesn't have anything to eat. And when that happens, then your natural primordial nature, that shining underlying being of light in a way that we are, comes through. And that's enlightenment. That is basically that natural enlightenment that is covered over by continuous thinking is really allowed to shine. So that's how I see Zen. Other people might see it a little bit differently, but that was like how I explained it to myself. The Tibetan system is quite different. And in that system, I'm in the Nyingma school. That's literally the old school. There are 4 major schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And in our school, the focus is also on devotion to the guru. So it's a little bit more of a guru system, and where devotion to your teacher, to the guru, or in Tibetan, the Lama, is the mechanism of enlightenment. and how does it work? One of the insights from Buddha is that the mind becomes what it focuses on. Like you focus on something, the mind becomes that. So by focusing through devotion on the guru, in a way, your mind and the mind of the guru merge. But your teacher already merged with the mind of their guru and of their guru, and of their guru, eventually leading to Buddha. So through devotion to the living Buddha that is your teacher, and that's how you regard it in Tibetan Buddhism, you merge with the stream of enlightenment going all the way back to the Buddha, and that's enlightenment. It gets nominally to the same place, it's simply that the mechanism is a little bit different. And incidentally, I'll mention, because there's someone out there that knows, that in Zen Buddhism, there's also the transmission of light. So it isn't like these things are completely distinct. You can find it's simply that different schools of Buddhism emphasize different techniques. They're pulling at different parts of the elephant, and they all work. It's simply that they emphasize one or the other.
I love that explanation. That's an awesome outline of many different topics. And so one of the thoughts I want to touch on that you mentioned is this topic of beginner's mind. And it's also one of the attitudes under mindfulness that is mentioned as a good practice as you're going on this journey of wellness. I'm curious how you think about that topic, or if you've thought about it much. I'm curious if you could share your thoughts on it.
Sure. Beginner's mind, what does that mean? And actually, Insurance Suzuki, if I recall, and you're making me recall something from many years ago, is in the mind of the expert, there are few possibilities. In the mind of the beginner, they're unlimited. And what beginner's mind is, in essence, approaching the world in a non-intellectual way. So when we approach the world in an intellectual way, then everything has to break down into concepts, and in a way, like in business, if I can bring that up, it's often said, what can't be measured can't be optimized. So in business, for example, I'm just trying to draw an analogy, it's all oriented towards measuring and being able to see things in a very conceptual way and measurable way so that you can improve them, which also means that anything that can't be measured is ignored as irrelevant. And so in a way, a beginner's mind is saying, I'm not going to structure the world conceptually as an expert would. I'm simply going to accept the world as it is in a direct way. And then that actually opens up a fan of opportunities that are unavailable if you close your mind because you're trying to fit things into conceptual buckets.
Very interesting. Yes, thanks for sharing that. And you've been meditating, and one of the topics we discussed is about, some of the benefits that you've gotten from this practice. I'm curious if you could share some of the ways that you've benefited or changed from your meditation practice.
So I'm gonna. The word benefit is a little bit difficult for me in that that's not in the way that I approach meditation. Benefit has nothing to do with it. If you are a musician, some musicians, they're kind of like the love of the music is why they do it. They can't stop making the music because the music is their master. And so benefit has nothing to do with it. They're an artist because they can't help themselves. That's what they're required to do. And so in my case, although I can describe some benefit, it is not the reason that I meditate. The reason that I meditate is that when I was in college, I read this book and it connected with me. When I met the gurus, it connected with me, and therefore I pursued that connection. And part of the instruction of that connection, sit and meditate. And therefore I meditate. But it isn't because I'm getting anything from it. It's because it is a calling that of a particular commitment that I have. Now, I'll also address the benefit element. And the way that I would characterize it is, and it has to do again with beginner's mind, because when I wake up, I often, the first thing I do is, what problem do I need to solve today? Which is a really conceptual and graspy way of looking at the world. But I'm sure that many of us experience it that way. What's my agenda for today? And you might conceive of some things that you experience as problems. I have this problem to solve, whatever. But when I sit down to meditate, sometimes those things, same things come up, but they don't come up in the hardened problem solution way. They simply come up as opportunities. Things soften. The world doesn't come up as this solid battle that one is going to engage in, but more as a fluid stream of opportunities. So I would, if I had to describe things in terms of benefit, it's that I feel like I'm able to engage the world in a more flexible way, because the world isn't hardened in my mind through the practice of meditation.
This brings up a really interesting point, because my entree into the world of mindfulness was through a research-based program, Mindful Self-Compassion, similar to John Kabat-Zinn's stress reduction program. Very westernized, and so much of business is now stepping into this arena of mindfulness. And and particularly in Silicon Valley, it seems like these tools are being used as a way to really focus or to calm. And it seems like it's all in the context. Well, a lot of it seems to be couched in the context of like the same old productivity machine, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's two ways of looking at it, at least for me. One is, I'm thankful that folks discovered meditation practices and are able to achieve this in their lives. That's great. It's also meditation is also not just a product in the supermarket aisle. It seems that if you approach let me not say Buddhism, but more meditation as a pill, then you haven't changed who you are in engaging the practice, because you're doing it in a functional way in order to produce benefits for me. And as long as the world is a mechanism to produce stuff for me or for you as a you, then you're buying into the story that you are something that needs to be defended, something that needs to be improved. And as long as the person, one as an individual, buys into that, then you're cutting yourself off from the source of enlightenment, which is boundless love and compassion. Boundless means without bounds, not the skin is not the bound. And so as long as we're doing that, then it makes it difficult. You can make progress, but you can never get to the goal.
There's a statistic that you can see online. I don't know how accurate it is, but if you search how many people meditate in the world, it says something like 14% of people meditate at least once a year. And I found that as a very small amount of people. And just to tie it back to this point, one of the reasons why I think it's good to talk about meditation and mindfulness, and particularly its benefits, is because it really opens up the practice to more people and gets more people to do these things. And I think eventually more people will be open to these larger ideas and working on themselves. At some point, I think, it's it's hard to not do the inner work and work on yourself if you're doing any meditation. So that's one of the reasons why I like talking about the benefits. I think it makes it much more accessible for people to start these practices.
And I couldn't agree more. That's why there's I spoke about it in both sides way, and so I would encourage folks to that it's wonderful, and there's more to it. There's a profound source of it, just as yoga is a complete spiritual system. It's not just stretching and warrior one, warrior two. It's and there's a lot to it. So it's great for people to have a start and do meditation and gain the benefits from it. There's simply more to it as well.
So yes, thanks for sharing that. Are there ways that you bring this into your working life? I'm curious how you take some of these concepts, if you take some of these concepts and use them in managerial practices. There's a big movement to operationalize mindfulness, operationalize compassion in the workplace. And generally, I think that's a good thing for the reason that I mentioned earlier, just to expose more people to these practices. I'm curious if you maybe consciously or unconsciously are bringing a lot of these tools or some of these tools and practices and benefits to your team or the people that you work with.
Got it. I wonder what they would say. It's like is the question. There is a way in which I bring it. It isn't, I don't believe, like precisely meditation. It is, and maybe I'll take a step back. So in the Tibetan system, you engage in visualization. And so through visualization practice is part of how you are able to see directly and your goal. What is it that you're trying to see? So the connection I would make is really around my as a leader. My focus is very much on clarity, on being very clear. What is it that we're trying to produce, and why are we trying to produce it? And to the extent that folks have a very clear idea of what it is, then that we are working on, that we're producing, then folks can bring themselves through ownership of that goal. And by the way, in Zen, we talk about bendowa, which is like full-bodied or full-bodied commitment or full-throated commitment to what you're doing. And so that's very much my leadership style. When folks, because my experience is that if you are clear about the goal and go into it full on, then it will tend to occur. And if you need help, you'll get help. If you need to renegotiate the goal, you'll renegotiate it. If you need to learn something else, you'll learn it. If you need to get up earlier in order to get it done, you'll get it done, if you own it. And so that's really all I do when I manage, is listen to the way people speak to detect confusion, lack of clarity, or lack of ownership. And then I try to intervene in that way.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love, like, when you said full body commitment, my body was like, yes, let's do that. That makes me think, we know that you have experience at the Founder Institute, and in maybe you're even currently mentoring some founders. And it seems like that full body commitment in that space of, startup entrepreneurship arena is like such an important thing. Tell us a little bit about what you have going on with your mentoring of founders.
Yeah, actually, even last night, I was mentoring some founders, and most of there's a tie-in I'll offer. Most of the time when I'm mentoring early stage founders, what's missing is understanding how the pieces come together in building a company. And in my mind, it tends to be, how are your current customers going from point A to point B today? If they're not going from point A to point B, then probably there's no product that's going to help them. As an example, if lots of people are going from LA to San Francisco on horseback, then if you invent a car, there's going to be many people going from LA to San Francisco in cars. But if you're trying to make a route from Topeka to San Francisco, if not too many people are doing that, it doesn't matter what great technology, more people are not going to do that. So first is trying to figure out point A to point B, how are they doing it today, therefore proving that it's important for them. And then what's the secret sauce, using Aderesi's terminology, that produces a technology that gets into point A to point B, and then given the value created, then how you're peeling off part of the value, and that's your revenue model. And getting that very clear is often something that that founders, that's the work of mentoring founders.
Yes, it's something that I'm working on. I'm sure Cynthia's working on this. It's the constant work of the founder as well, to continue to validate the value proposition and the problems you're solving. It's we're in the weeds of that at the moment.
Is the weeds every day. And there's something I'll add in that, and it does go back to that full body commitment, is that if the startup makes sense in an Excel spreadsheet today, then someone in some Fortune 500 company can take that same spreadsheet, present it, and get the project funded. Your commitment is what the company doesn't quite make sense on paper, but it's your commitment that actually makes it make sense. You know, a founder can say, I'm going there because I'm using the force to get there. The CEO of a Fortune 500 company cannot tell the board, well, I'm using the force, therefore this is the decision I'm making. But the force, or this ability to just go in all in, is a superpower of founders that is not available to anybody else.
I feel a little better about myself right now. Or at least it feels a little less painful.
Well, you know, whatever it takes.
Right?
So jumping back into wellness and these topics of mindfulness, I'm curious if you knew about mindfulness before you started meditating, because, you know, a lot of people conflate mindfulness with meditation. Could you talk a little bit about your experience with the topic of mindfulness?
Sure. I don't no. The short answer is no. I didn't have any practice beforehand, before I started at the Zen Center in San Francisco. I didn't have any practice or experience with it beforehand. You know, I consider mindfulness the kind of like almost like the aftertaste of meditation. You know, so being able to maintain, I speak about it in a little bit different way internally, but given that the usage of the word, then it's really maintaining the same perspective and view, independent of whether we call it that I'm meditating right now. In reality, that there's no such thing. Meditation is really there all the time. You know, you can cover it with something else, like I'm working, but that doesn't mean that the meditation ever stopped. So maintaining that mindfulness or just connection to that underlying meditation is the way I see it.
And I think, like what you just said, you just moved from the structure of meditation as a tool into like the philosophy of how you live with these types of practices.
Yes, that's the way we're in.
So Mark was saying that at one point you actually were considering being a monk.
I did, yes. This is some time ago, and there was a small cohort of us that arrived at the monastery. This is with the Tibetan lamas, and at the time, I seriously considered it. I really, is this really my path? And then at some point I decided that the way that I conceived of life was about is to continue to have a very strong connection to the Dharma, or the teachings, as one calls it, but do it in the world, like not be a monk whose main, living in a monastery. And that out of that cohort, there's some other people made a different choice, and they've been in living as monks for 20 years, and because it has been 20 years, and yeah, they're very different. I mean, you can really tell after a couple decades of monastic practice that the person changes. They're not the same person.
Wow. And so when you made that transition over to Tibetan, was it spurred on by a particular guru that you had met?
It really was. And again, it was a coincidence in that I was living in Puerto Rico. Amazingly, after 14 years in the Bay Area, I did not connect with Tibetan Buddhists. But and it actually happened in Puerto Rico, which is where I'm from. And my mother actually noticed in the newspaper that these lamas were coming, and she knew I was Buddhist, so she was like, "Oh, like, take me to see these guys." And I go, "Great, Mom, I'll take you to see these guys." And when I saw them, the the electricity started, and kind of like almost like a disturbance in the force, if we were using Star Wars terms. But I couldn't quite. They were a little bit beyond conception. There was like, how far my concepts went, and then they were operating beyond them. And I was like, this is, what is this? And then that's when I almost instantly decided to join their what's called a sangha, which is like the congregation, if we're using a little bit more easy to understand terms. And that was it. But it's really, by the way, very, very obvious, when folks are operating beyond rationality, because you can't reach them, because you're gonna. I remember looking at them and trying to trap them in my concepts, and they were just like, "Hey, you can't do that. I'm beyond that," and so that was the connection.
On the topic of rationality, in our last chat, you mentioned this topic of, I forget if it was you were talking about general people or perhaps yourself, or that topic, but you mentioned people are addicted to rational thinking. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, and incidentally, these are all things that one can only speak about oneself, and even in modern, if you look at system 1, system 2, system 1, system 2, and more modern psychology, they've identified that you make a decision emotionally and then rationalize it so quickly that you think that you're being rational. But what is rationality? Rationality, I mean, there's two aspects to it. But in that case, rationality is really a defense mechanism, is a way of being able to justify your action with something that is explainable to a third party. So and there's limits to that. Rationality is wonderful. It's brought us all this AI revolution. All that is out of computing. It was happening at with electrons and GPU design and all that. And that's all rationality. Science is wonderful, and it has limits. There's only so much that it can do. To this day, where does consciousness come from? There's no scientific explanation for it. None. At all. We have no idea. So rationality is something that is incredibly useful, but it's a tool. So the in a way the question becomes, and it's really a question of mind, is like, are you a slave or beholden to your mind, or is the mind a tool that you use? So I would consider that with very developed practitioners, they can use rationality if they need it, but they're not beholden to it.
Fascinating. You know, early, I'm about the same era as you. And early in when I was in the School of Health Information Science, we were studying medical decision making, and we would do interviews of these experts in certain areas, like very fine areas. Like we were really trying to figure out how they made these different decisions, because we wanted to build programs that would help, that would be decision support systems, right? One of the things that emerged was that the decision was made, and then the rational part was very post hoc. Like it didn't often match. And that was really fascinating to me. And I feel like there's some kind of connection to this concept of like full body decisions, like emotional processes that are behind what really drives us in life, right? And then there is kind of these tools of rational thought that, you know, sometimes help, and sometimes are just like an add-on to explain why we're doing what we want to do. That just fascinates me.
And you know, what comes to mind as you describe it is like, we can also see it in sports. You know, who wanted it more at the end of the day? Like, is what makes, not whoever's stronger, it's who had we talk about will and grit and and mettle. So these are things that are, you know, often not really irrational, but they're tools that we can observe that people can tap into these powers in order to achieve or in the world.
You've hit on something that's really important to me. And one of the things that with athletes that has been studied is how well, like if they speak to themselves in like a supportive and kind way in the process of doing their, you know, sports or competition, it actually will improve their performance. And so like these are some of those things that are you wouldn't necessarily think rationally would make a difference, you know, that just like running an extra mile or, you know, doing the physical things would make the most important things. But yeah, this idea of like how we work with ourselves and our own, you know, I could say spirituality or our own larger self, however you want to define that, is such an important part of like how we can be successful and create the life for ourselves that we want to create. Yeah. Speaking of which, do you want to talk a little bit about Bellwether Coffee and where you are now and what you're up to?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So a couple of years ago, I joined a company called Bellwether Coffee, and what we do is that we manufacture coffee roasters. And you go like, what's, you know, in a way, like, what's so important about that? So most coffee shops don't roast their own coffee. If you walk through the corner, they buy coffee that's already been roasted by somebody else, and then they serve it. If it was roasted by somebody else, there's two effects. One is that it was sitting in the supply chain for months. And two, it was branded by somebody else because in a way somebody else cooked it. You know, you can only brand the things you cook yourself or roast yourself in the case of coffee. So the reason that our customers are buying it, and it's typically coffee shops, is that now they can have fresh roasted coffee at the highest level of quality that they brand themselves. So that is the rational element of it, or the economics of it, or why people are buying. But it produces two effects that are really important. The machine is electric, and so most coffee roasting today, or 99.9% of it, is with gas-powered roasters. that have emissions and produce global warming or lead to climate change. So we are, by electrifying coffee roasting, and when it means that we're actually bringing electrification to the question and reducing emissions, or at least making emissions easier to control, because you move the point to the power plant and then you can change it at the power plant and then decide, how much emissions are associated with that electricity. But it also produces a second effect, and that is that the coffee shop is now buying directly from the farmer as directly as possible. There's exporters, importers, etc. But now you have a relationship with the farm. You've eliminated middlemen. One of the tragedies, really, of modern coffee farming is that coffee farmers often don't make enough money to live on. There are so many middlemen or middle people between them in the highlands of Kenya or in the highlands of Guatemala and us in San Francisco drinking a $5 latte, that they're making barely any money. They're making like 4 cents out of those $5. When we connect directly with the farmer, because now the coffee shop is directly buying, we're able to implement something called living income pricing. So at Bellwether, we actually interview the farmers. We identify, hey, what does it actually cost to live here? And then we pay him that amount. We don't pay him whatever the market bears. We pay him living income pricing. And that wouldn't be possible if the roaster, being electric and being on site, didn't reorganize the supply chain. So those are the effects. One is around climate change, and two is around justice for the coffee farmers.
Well, and I love the fact too that you're targeted onto small businesses, basically small, medium-sized businesses, right? That's fabulous to have that kind of support too. That makes it seems like it's a win across the board.
It really is, and it's an exciting company, and it's an exciting opportunity. I'm delighted to be associated with it.
Is there a coffee shop that you could share that has your technology in it? I'm thinking primarily in Berkeley, but maybe there are some other ones that our audience might know about that they could visit and check out.
Coffee and Water Lab. I can think of this in San Francisco. Coffee shop in San Francisco. Presida Park, also in San Francisco. I'm trying to think of ones here in Berkeley, Oakland. I can't think of any right now, but I'll send you, afterward, I'll send you some links.
We'll share some notes of that in our summary.
Well, we're coming to the end of our interview here. And one of the things that we like to ask all of our guests is a question about Techquanimity. And so we named this podcast Techquanimity because we are interested in the intersection of technology and the contemplative arts. And also we feel the tension of the world that we're living in, where information is coming at us so fast. AI and tech, the change rate is like nothing anybody's ever seen in anyone's lifetime. And so we define Techquanimity as the ability to use tech or contemplative practices as a way to be able to help yourself live in the modern world. Do you have any particular techniques or things that you do, or even opinions on that?
Yeah, sure. One thing that has come up is scrolling, in the world of feeds. And in a way, we have to recognize that there is no end to scrolling. You could scroll forever. So the question with information, and it's unlimited, is whether we're feeding. Remember earlier in the conversation, I was talking about in Zen Buddhism that the mind is always trying to eat. It's always trying to, so are we beholden to that? Are we allowing ourselves to the mind loose on an infinite array of information on the internet to keep eating? And what is that producing? So versus looking at what are we trying to accomplish, what are we about, and then the vast sea of information is there, and then taking from that sea according to what we are actually trying to do. It's very easy to get lost in the way that you brought it up. There's all this information coming at you. It doesn't mean that it's up to you whether you're gonna accept that. And that's the empowerment that I'm practicing on, and I would encourage everybody else to also do.
Amazing answer. Yeah, you really hit one of the main problems, like right on the nose. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I've just really enjoyed this interview and getting a chance to meet you a little bit more.
So have I. It's been such a pleasure to share with you and with your audience. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Marcos. This has been awesome. We'll keep in touch. And so now we're gonna close here. We'll usher you off the stage and do a little recap. Thank you so much, Marcos.
Bye-bye.
Wow, that was awesome. I particularly loved this final reminder at the end of being aware of what the brain is consuming, as we can very much get lost in that and can turn into an automatic habit. And becoming aware of all that consumption and how it may be impacting you subconsciously and consciously is definitely a welcome reminder.
Well, in that structure that he provided, which kind of connected back to that full body yes of like, what we want to do with our lives, like as entrepreneurs, is so important because we only have limited time in our day, and kind of linking that full body yes with how we then go out and seek information and pull it out of this just overwhelming massive information. I'm going to think a little bit differently about my scrolling. I definitely think there's room for entertainment scrolling, if you will. But yeah, such good food for thought.
Yeah, on the topic of scrolling, one thing I've done is really just my friends might not like this, but I've unfollowed pretty much everybody, and I only follow inspirational content, essentially. And so whenever I go on Instagram, it's just all these positive reminders that I see. I do get caught up in this thing, and I realize minutes have gone by, and I need to stop. But when I am on there, it's much more positive reminders than I imagine the average individual.
Well, this is a really kind of tech and nerdy solution for me, but TikTok is the thing that tends to suck my time the most. And so if I know I'm going to open up TikTok and play, I'll be like, Alexa, set a timer for 20 minutes.
Nice.
Oh, you can hear her in the background. She's like, yes, I'll do that now, Cynthia. Well, what an amazing interview to hear about a career that spanned from creating search engine algorithms and SEO, amazing tools, to creating a better world with a very physical technology. Yeah, that was a great interview.
Yeah, super awesome. Thanks for being here, Cynthia. What do you got going on these next couple weeks into the holiday?
Well, I am gearing up because I'm doing a 3-month training that starts the second week of January. And this is kind of a master class in behavior change. So a lot of times people go into the new year and they have a list of things that they want to change about themselves or intentions. And, sometimes they roll from year to year, don't come to fruition. So this class is basically taking everything that I studied as a researcher when I used to be at the University of Texas and combining it with the science of these contemplative practices and the power of these contemplative practices to really create a gentle path to change, which is very counterculture. Everybody's like, how can we do it the fastest? How can we, make it happen as soon as possible? What kind of corners can we cut? Where this is really, we're going to do it in community. We're going to do it slowly and methodically, and we're going to be supporting each other. And so I'm very excited about it. It seems like, for me, a personal culmination of a lot of the work that I've done in my career, and then kind of capped off with the stuff that I put together in the Stanford program for compassion, where I actually have a survey that allows people to really understand the parts of themselves that they need to nurture and to support to be able to thrive. So I'm super excited about that. What do you have going on?
Yeah, and just to touch on what you're doing, I really enjoyed going through the inner ally process. It's definitely contributed to my own self-understanding. So I recommend folks check out what Cynthia's doing. It's very cool, and I imagine it can help a lot of folks really begin to understand themselves. So definitely check her out at innerally.com and on LinkedIn. So at Mindful Text, we're currently focused on talking to more folks in the healthcare space, so physicians, occupational therapists, nurses, and we've talked to about a dozen so far, just to really further solidify and validate the issue we're looking to solve. I'm not ready to share that yet because we're still gathering interviews. I've got like 10 folks lined up now based on an outreach we did yesterday, and so there's a lot of information that I'll be able to share soon, but essentially we're looking to bring mindfulness into the healthcare space and make it much more accessible. And we have data to show how we're doing that and why it's better than a lot of different apps and organizations out there. And it's very compelling, and we are having a lot of great conversations. So if you are in the healthcare space, I may reach out to you if you see a note from me. Love to chat, or if you're out there, please reach out to me, and would love to share a little bit more of what we're finding, and perhaps we can learn together.
Well, so important to be doing work in that arena, because there is so much suffering and burnout, and mindfulness and the compassion that you incorporate into the techniques that your company uses is just going to be wonderful for that population.
Thanks, Cynthia. All right, another great episode. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we'll look forward to the next one.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.